So, today I want to talk about why the Derek Chauvin conviction isn't enough. Content warning, I'm going to be talking about police brutality throughout this video, especially about stuff that's happened over the course of the past week. So, just keep that in mind before going forward. I feel like it's been long enough to talk about this without appearing completely insensitive to those who really needed to take the time to celebrate a win. Anybody who was close to George Floyd, anybody who had intimate emotional connections or ties to this case, and anybody who experienced any sort of joy and celebration of a victory in Chauvin getting convicted, I don't want to take any of that away. There is a reason to consider that a victory and to celebrate. That said, a lot has really happened this past week. And it only goes to prove that Derek Chauvin ending up in prison is not enough. And I just want to spend some time talking about some of these incidents, as well as some incidents that occurred beforehand, to talk about why this conviction is only a small piece of the puzzle. Now, before I go into all of that, I do want to say that Chauvin was not the only officer responsible for George Floyd's death. He was the only one convicted, however. There were other police officers there, and they were not held accountable in any way. It's also likely that Derek Chauvin, in our current system, will likely never feel true remorse for what he did to another human being. He murdered someone. The state actually recognizes this. And it's my belief that it is very likely that he will not learn, and he will continue with this attitude that is consistent of the police force for the rest of his life. More shocked that he got a conviction against him than him possibly seeking any sort of possibility of developing remorse or becoming humble. George Floyd will also never be able to return home to his family. And while the state does recognize that and Chauvin's responsibility in this, it doesn't necessarily make it justice. Especially given the fact that it took a year of protesting, an overwhelming amount of evidence, including an actual video. And it still took all of that to get the conviction. Never mind the fact that we live in a society where we collectively feared and expected that Chauvin still might not be prosecuted, even with that overwhelming evidence. I think it speaks to a failure in our system that justifies, in my mind, why we should be talking about defunding and abolishing the police. That's just by looking at the Chauvin case. However, if we look at this past week before me putting out and making this video, nothing in this system has fundamentally changed. Black people still can't get even a small victory in court without there being another loss of life, another reason to mourn, another reminder that they should fear in the United States. As minutes before Chauvin's conviction, a young 16-year-old girl by the name of Ma'Khia Bryant was killed in the street. While there are reports that she herself may have called the police to ask for help, those remain unconfirmed. But if she did, her calling for help from the people who ended up killing her is an atrocity. Now, I do want to address this further. There is no justification for a 16-year-old girl being shot and killed by the police. You cannot convince me of that. There is no justification in this case. There are ways in which this situation could have been handled. And I just want to go over what the New York Times has written about what happened first and foremost, and then I want to show you a tweet that a psychologist put out and talk about that. So, the Times writes that as Officer Reardon got out of his vehicle, he encountered 7 people outside a 2-story brick home and asked what's going on. Yelling could be heard in the background. An unidentified girl appeared to fall to the grass after being attacked by Miss Bryant and then kicked by an unidentified man. The video footage then showed Miss Bryant, who was holding a knife, appearing to lunge toward a person dressed in pink who was pinned against a car in the driveway. Hey, hey, Officer Raridan said as he pulled his gun. Get down, get down. He fired 4 quick shots, and Miss Bryant dropped to the ground at the edge of the driveway. Now, I have seen the footage, and to be honest, going through this video, I have seen more footage than is probably healthy for anyone to look at, but that's part of the process of having to go through this and document this and talk about all of this. It's horrific seeing incident after incident where you're watching a body literally crumble to the floor, especially when it's a teenager, especially when it's a child. And it's horrific. And there is no justification in my mind for any of that. And I think it's even more unjustifiable when there have been numerous tweets, and I'll just show you one example of it, where a psychologist had come out and said, I've successfully de-escalated teen fights at foster group homes. Teens who had knives, nunchucks, bricks. The only thing I was armed with was a whistle. There are ways to effectively and compassionately de-escalate without killing children. Invest in mental health. Now, this particular thread and a lot of other conversations from psychologists, mental health professionals, therapists, social workers have come out and basically defended the fact that this could have been prevented. And that, to me, speaks to a problem. I think we need to start really considering the arguments about defunding the police in favor of mental health professionals and healthcare professionals in general handling these situations, given that a psychologist with a whistle feels more confident to be able to do their job effectively to save lives than a trained police officer armed with a taser and a gun. A taser which he could have used and chose not to. A taser which may have kept everybody alive. Even if certain professionals have justified the position of the police in doing what they did. In addition to that, I just want to point out that a police officer is supposed to be, in the ideal of the society. I'm not claiming this is what a police officer is in our society at all. I don't trust or like the police for a number of different reasons. This being a huge part of that. But police are supposed to be, according to the way the state's supposed to function, the people who are supposed to come in and end conflict. They are not supposed to be judge, jury, and executioner. They are not supposed to make quick decisions that end lives. They are the people putting their life on the line, and they signed up for that job. And most of the time, they're not even the ones who get injured or hurt in the incidents that they go to. Most of the time, it's the people that they are supposed to be arresting that end up getting hurt. So even in the worst case scenarios for a police officer, that's literally part of the job. That's literally what you signed up for. And I think it's unjustifiable at this point to talk about their safety and protection versus a 16-year-old girl or anybody else at this point. The criminal justice system and prisons do have a lot of issues. There's the whole prison pipeline. There's so much more wrong with this system than just the police itself. But even if we ignore all of that side of it, the police are not supposed to be gunning people down in the street. That is not their job. Even in the most the most gifting version of their job, they are not supposed to be doing that. Even if you consider them to be the height of moral responsibility, that is not their job. And even in the absolute worst cases, the police departments across the United States generally have a 2-shot rule. They are supposed to shoot 2 times and reassess. This is pretty consistent across departments. I don't know if this particular department has that, but from what I've seen, that is a pretty consistent rule. And if you look at the video and you look at the body cam footage, which I'm not going to show, there is no assessment after the 2 shots. There's 4 consecutive shots. And that is unjustifiable, even in the boundaries of protocol, which give cops far too much leeway as it is. Now, it's hard for me to look at this clip and assume that she would have been treated the same had she been a white girl. In fact, I think there would be a much greater chance of her being alive if she was white. When I see this next to stories that people have been posting on Twitter and talking about, where a teenage boy last October stabbed a black police officer in the neck, and that officer was able to discern with a lethal injury or potentially lethal injury to switch over to a taser and to tase the young boy and to bring him into custody alive. Why can't we do the same thing for black girls in the United States? That's my question. In a country where you also have stand your ground laws, where people are literally allowed to defend themselves on their property, and I don't, again, know if this was one of those instances, but when those types of policies end up affecting people across racial lines disproportionately, and in a society where Kyle Rittenhouse was able to be taken alive, there's no justification. There's none. Like, I can't tell you how many more reasons why it is unjustifiable that a 16-year-old girl was killed in this way. And I don't want to hear the defenses of the police. I really don't. I also don't want to hear anybody talking about people who are worried about saving the other girl's life. Because most people in this group who are standing there defending the police would not give any shit if the other girl died. If the other girl got caught in the crossfire, it would have been, why was she fighting? If the other girl had a weapon, well, why was she holding a weapon? You would come up with any excuse to justify your position because you don't care about black people in the first place. And it would just be lovely if you would just admit it at this point. Because if you're willing to justify the death of a 16-year-old girl from a police officer shooting her 4 times, then you are willing to justify just about anything. And it's probably the same people defending the police officer who shot Adam Toledo as well. And there's not going to be any reaching you. It's just the reality of it. So these people who try to defend another white cop killing a black girl in the system, when there's psychologists, numerous psychologists, who are sure and have demonstrated in their own professions that they're capable of disarming a situation like this, it makes me really believe that we need to reevaluate our current system. And I believe that should make you consider that as well if you're watching this video. And that's one of the things that's horrific about all this, is that there is an alternative, and we choose not to do it because we'd prefer punitive justice and the possibility of death over an alternative system with healthcare professionals doing their job and making sure people with mental health conditions, people of color, and so many more people who are consistently affected by the police are not. And that's not to say that, things would be perfect in the alternative system, but I think we need to really start shifting in that direction. And that's just one case that I've just described to you. One case. I cannot devote all the time in the world to talk about every single case and give it all the time it deserves. So if you are someone watching this, I implore you to take the time when you see the little articles that I'm posting to look up the names of the people I mention, to look up their stories, to look up the accounts and watch the body cams, and to see what is going on in this country. Because I am going to share with you some of the other things that have happened since the Chauvin verdict came in, and then move on to some other topics within this. So we have in Spotsville County, a sheriff's department picked up a man whose vehicle had broken down around 2:30 a.m. Wednesday and gave Isaiah L. Brown a lift from a gas station to his home nearby, the Virginia State Police said Friday. Less than an hour later, Brown called 911, setting off a chain of events that would lead to this near-fatal shooting by a deputy. Some reports have said that it might be the same deputy who just had given him a ride. We have this one. In North Carolina, deputies shot and killed a black man while serving a search warrant Wednesday. Authorities said, spurring an outcry from community members who demanded law enforcement accountability and the immediate release of body camera footage. Authorities wouldn't provide details of the shooting, but an eyewitness said that Andrew Brown Jr. was shot while trying to drive away and that deputies fired at him multiple times. Then we move on to California, where a California officer is being put on leave, actually. It's maybe some sort of minor punishment, probably not severe enough, after punching a woman in the face twice while she was in handcuffs. Then we get body cam footages that came out this week. A Michigan police officer punches a suspect during traffic stop. Department chief defends actions. This occurred on March 26th. We have another case. Only a handful of hours separated the memorial for Thompson and the protests calling for justice in his name. This is Anthony Thompson Jr., who was killed in a bathroom on April 12th. The police cam footage for his death has been released. On April 1st, in a parking lot at a Hyatt hotel, the Fremont Police Department killed someone named Stephen Patrick Mosley, who's 36 years old. The footage came out of him, and this footage literally had him crying, "Kill me, kill me, kill me," as a police dog was biting him. This is what I'm talking about. All of this that I just showed you came out over the course of this week. And yes, some of those are body cams and some of those are actual incidents. But those are the ones we know about. These are the ones that we're able to get footage of. Because that doesn't include traffic stops that nobody was there to record. That doesn't include harassments and arrests of people walking down the street. That doesn't include news stories and body cams that are going to be released and come out later in the next coming weeks that refer back to this time period. Because nobody caught the police in the act during the moment. And it isn't going to be found out till later. This doesn't include the fact that Daunte Wright was killed only days before the end of the Chauvin trial, not 10 miles from where Chauvin was on trial. This doesn't include the number of literal children who have been abused and killed by the police in the span of this year alone. We start with Adam Toledo, who was shot and killed at the age of 13. We look at the situation that happened in Hawaii, where a 16-year-old boy was fatally shot by Hawaii Police Department officers after a police pursuit on Monday, and the medical examiner identified the teen as Iramander Saikap. That doesn't include the fact that earlier this year in Rochester, New York, a 9-year-old girl was pepper sprayed when she was being taken from a home where she was probably under some sort of distress or stressful emotional situation, and because she wouldn't get in the vehicle, instead of giving her a stuffed animal or trying to coax her into the vehicle using compassionate means, they pepper sprayed her in the face and threw her in the back of the vehicle. This doesn't include the fact that this same week, there were cops literally harassing entire squads of cars, harassing children, and this was shown on Twitter, for not having a license for their bikes and having them confiscated. And if you look at the screen right now, you can see, as it pans out, that there's tons of police vehicles around. There's probably at least 6 vehicles in that video. That's not including another clip where 2 teenagers, black, were riding bikes, and they quote-unquote fit the description of suspects who committed a robbery, and then were cuffed, arrested, and fingerprinted just for riding bikes. And the video footage is here. They're told to get on the ground, and they're screamed at repeatedly. In a country where there's 42 million black people, 36 per million are killed. The rates compared to white people are more than 2 to 1. And the Columbus Police Department has had the second highest number of children of any local law enforcement agency since 2013 killed. This is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with. And this is completely unacceptable. The fact that I can keep listing names and keep going into stories, that this is not even an exhaustive list, this year alone. Because there's been 60 Black people killed that we know of. Just Black people, not other racial minorities, not other marginalized groups, not mentally ill people, just Black people killed over the course of the year currently. And we're about 120 days in. That means one's dying every 2 days. And that's the ones that we're able to get reports on and full stories of. That's not including people whose racial identities may not have been identified or reported. That's not including, any other racial minority or group. That's just Black people. Think about that. Like, that's absurd. And the number of incidents just keep happening in such a short span of time. And the fact that there's been so many things that I was able to show you, not just deaths, but harassment and all sorts of other things. In such a short span of time since the trial, it's telling about the way things are. We need to start shifting towards mental health professionals handling these crisis situations and begin to stop the use of police forces, since they obviously have shown they cannot handle themselves properly. There is no justification for a 9-year-old being pepper sprayed. There is no justification for a 13 and 16-year-old within literally a month of each other being shot and killed, and adults being humiliated every other day when they're being shot and abused by a group of people whose job is supposed to be protecting and serving people. They are failing their job. The problem is, I don't know if they are in this system, with systemic racism being what it is. Derek Chauvin, at the end of the day, was one cop in a system with people who are authorized by the state and given the justification and jurisdiction to commit similar acts to what he did. They are defended through inadequate and faulty policies that defend their position and people who come out and support them all the time over the lives of people. I'm tired of the excuses. I'm tired of the comments of, oh, well, if only they had complied, as if it is easy to do so when you have a fight or flight response, when you have a fight, flight, or freeze response, and you're asked to do this, and you're scared for your life. And it doesn't just have to be your possible death. It could be literally entering into the prison industrial complex, being forced to take a plea bargain on a deal, having your life ruined by the experience of just being arrested. There's so much to this that goes beyond just the incident with the police. And that's why, at the end of the day, while I am glad that all of the work that went to Derek Chauvin's conviction made it so that some people were able to celebrate a victory, his conviction is not enough. And it does not serve justice, because there is no justice to be had while we still have this current system as it exists. While it exists as it does, there is no justice. We need to keep fighting against this, we need to keep pushing, and we need to not stop. The police need to either be defunded or abolished. And as far as I'm concerned, abolish the police.